Hey, everybody, welcome back. We are tackling a really big question today. Is U.S. aid to Africa actually effective?
Oh, yeah.
We're really going to go deep on this one using this opinion piece
Okay.
from Dr. Nicholas Okumu.
Okay.
Now, he is an orthopedic surgeon,
Wow.
but he's also a global surgery advocacy fellow.
Okay.
So,
Interesting perspective.
talk about a unique perspective, right?
Yeah.
He makes some pretty bold claims in this piece.
Okay.
So are you ready to kind of unpack this with me?
Absolutely. This is definitely a conversation that needs to happen, especially given all of the debate right now
Right.
about USAID funding cuts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dr. Okumu doesn't mince words.
Okay.
He says right off the bat, USAID has never been about Africa.
Oh, wow.
It's always been about America.
Hmm.
I mean, that's a already loaded statement, right?
It's provocative for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
But before we jump to any conclusions, I'm really curious to get your take on the historical context of USA
Okay. Yeah.
in Africa.
You're right. I mean, it is a provocative statement, and, it's easy to oversimplify these things.
Wow.
This is a complex issue.
Yeah.
But to understand the nuances of it, I think we do need to look back a little bit
Okay.
at the history of U.S. aid to Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So take the Cold War era, for example.
Okay.
A lot of U.S. aid was really about countering Soviet influence,
Okay.
and sometimes
Mm-hmm.
that meant that support went to leaders.
Yeah.
Who weren't exactly, champions of democracy.
Right.
But they were, anti-communist.
Right.
So
It was all in the name of,
yeah, exactly.
containing communism.
Right. Yeah.
He uses the example of Mobutu Sese Seko
Oh, yeah.
in Zaire,
Yeah.
who received billions
Mm-hmm.
in U.S. support,
Yeah.
despite running a really corrupt regime.
Right.
I mean, it really makes you think about the motivations behind some of those decisions, right?
It does. It really highlights, I think, how geopolitical interests have influenced aid allocation.
Right.
Even today, I think you could argue.
Yeah.
Dr. Okumu argues that this pattern continues.
Yeah.
He points to the difference in the U.S. response to the crisis in Ukraine, for instance,
Okay.
versus conflicts in Africa.
Yeah.
The speed and the scale of the aid to Ukraine
Right.
has been far greater
Yeah.
than what we've seen for crises
Right.
in places like Sudan or Ethiopia.
Exactly. And it raises the question, are humanitarian needs always the driving force behind these aid decisions?
Yeah.
But I want to dig into something else that Dr. Okumu talks about,
Okay.
something called tied aid.
Okay.
He argues that a lot of U.S. aid comes with strings attached.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so it forces the recipient countries to use that money to buy American goods and services. He even quotes this 2006 Oxfam report
Okay.
that found that 70% of USAID funding
Wow.
never actually even leaves the U.S.
Mm.
Is that true, and how does that work?
Tied aid is a real practice, and it is a major point of contention.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Mm-hmm.
It means that when the U.S. gives aid,
Okay.
it requires that the recipient country
Right.
uses those funds to purchase goods and services from U.S. companies.
Okay.
So, for instance,
Yeah.
if the U.S. is funding, a health clinic in Kenya,
Yeah.
it might mandate that all of the medical equipment be sourced from American suppliers,
Okay.
even if they are cheaper,
Right.
and equally effective options
Yeah.
available from local or other international companies.
Yeah, so while it looks like the money is going to Africa,
Right.
a big chunk of it is actually flowing right back
Yeah.
to the U.S. economy.
To the U.S. economy.
Does that really help African countries develop their own industries?
Well, that's the core of the criticism, right?
Right.
Critics argue that tied aid creates this cycle of dependency. So instead of building capacity
Right.
within African nations,
Right.
it keeps them reliant on American products and expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And that can stifle the
Yeah.
growth of local industries
Right.
and potentially hinder
Yeah.
long-term economic development.
Dr. Okumu specifically calls out food aid.
Okay.
He says that U.S. law actually requires that food assistance
Mm-hmm.
be sourced from American farmers
Okay.
and shipped on U.S. flagged vessels.
Okay.
So, I mean, it definitely benefits American businesses,
right.
but does it really help African farmers become self-sufficient?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a tricky situation.
Yeah.
On the one hand,
Mm-hmm.
food aid is essential
Yeah.
for immediate crisis response.
Right.
However,
Yeah.
This practice can create unintended consequences
Right.
in the long run. By flooding local markets
Yeah.
with free or subsidized
Right.
American produce.
Yeah.
It can undercut local farmers
Okay.
who are then struggling to compete.
Mm-hmm.
And that disrupts local agricultural markets.
Right.
And it hinders the development
Yeah.
of, self-sustaining
Right.
food systems in Africa.
That's like a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
You're addressing immediate hunger,
Mm-hmm.
but you might be creating long-term dependency
Exactly.
on foreign food imports.
And that ties back to Dr. Okumu's broader argument
Mm-hmm.
about the need for a more sustainable approach, more empowering approach
Right.
to development assistance.
Yeah.
He argues that the aid industry itself
Okay.
has become kind of a self-serving system.
Okay.
He cites this statistic that out of $42 billion
Wow.
in U.S. foreign aid,
Okay.
a staggering $15 billion
Goodness.
went to U.S.-based firms and consultants,
Wow.
not the developing countries it was intended for.
So we've got this picture of tide aid
Yeah.
that is potentially hindering local industries,
Right.
and then a big portion of the funds
Yeah.
are going back to U.S. firms and consultants.
Mm-hmm.
But to play devil's advocate here for a second,
Okay.
Dr. Okumu does acknowledge the successes
Okay.
of programs like PEPFAR,
Right.
the President's emergency plan
Yeah.
for AIDS relief,
Mm-hmm.
which has made, undeniable progress
Uh-huh.
in combating HIV/AIDS in
Yeah.
Africa.
Yeah.
So how do we reconcile these successes
Yeah.
with all of these criticisms that we've been discussing?
It's complex, there's no doubt. Programs like PEPFAR
Right.
have demonstrably, saved millions of lives and made significant contributions to public health in Africa.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I think it's also important to examine the long-term impact.
Right.
Why, after decades
Yeah.
of donor-funded health initiatives,
Mm-hmm.
are so many African countries still heavily reliant on these external programs?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Shouldn't the goal be to build sustainable healthcare systems
Yeah.
within African countries themselves?
That's a critical question.
Yeah.
Dr. Okumu's point is not to diminish the positive impact
Right.
of programs like PEPFAR, but rather to, prompt a deeper discussion about long-term sustainability and self-reliance.
Yeah. This reminds me of economist Dambisa Moyo
Oh, yeah.
and her book, Dead Aid.
Right.
She argues that foreign aid,
Mm-hmm.
while well-intentioned,
Yeah.
can actually be detrimental in the long run.
Yeah,
It's a pretty controversial stance.
it is.
But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on her arguments.
Well, Moyo makes some really thought-provoking points.
Okay.
She argues that continuous aid can foster a culture of dependency.
Right.
It can discourage governments from implementing necessary reforms
Okay.
and fostering innovation.
So it's almost like constantly giving someone money.
Yeah.
Instead of teaching them a valuable skill,
Exactly.
they might just become reliant on those handouts
Right.
and lose the motivation to become self-sufficient.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so we're seeing this potential downside
Yeah.
of aid dependency.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Dr. Okumu doesn't just criticize the current system.
Right.
He offers some alternative paths forward.
Okay.
He advocates for African nations to embrace
Mm-hmm.
self-reliance,
Yeah.
regional cooperation,
Okay.
and new partnerships.
Okay.
He even suggests exploring collaborations
Mm-hmm.
with countries like China and India
Interesting.
as alternatives to traditional Western aid.
Okay.
This South-South collaboration idea is intriguing,
Yeah.
but it also raises some eyebrows, right?
Absolutely. South-South collaborations,
Right.
essentially partnerships
Yeah.
between developing countries in the global South.
Okay.
They offer the potential for a different kind of development model.
Okay.
They often come with less historical baggage, you could say,
Right.
and can be more aligned
Yeah.
with the specific needs and priorities of
Oh.
African nations.
But I've also read about concerns regarding China's involvement in Africa.
Yeah.
Particularly this issue of debt crap diplomacy,
Right.
where countries end up
Yeah.
owing huge sums to China,
Mm-hmm.
potentially losing control of strategic assets.
That's a valid concern.
Yeah.
And transparency is crucial in any partnership.
Right.
We've seen cases
Yeah.
where projects funded by Chinese loans
Right.
haven't always benefited local communities
Right.
or have raised concerns about sustainability.
Yeah.
It's not just about getting the funding, it's about ensuring that those investments
Good.
are truly aligned with long-term development goals
Right.
and don't create unsustainable debt burdens.
So it sounds like careful consideration
Yes.
and due diligence are key,
Absolutely.
no matter who the partner is.
Right.
But I want to get back to this idea
Okay.
of African nations relying more
Yeah.
on their own resources and ingenuity.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Okumu talks about this shift
Yeah.
towards self-reliance.
Yeah.
What would that actually look like in practice?
Well, it's about moving beyond this mindset
Okay.
of being a passive recipient of aid
Right.
and embracing a more proactive approach to development.
Okay.
It's about investing in education
Yeah.
to foster a skilled and entrepreneurial workforce.
So building capacity from within.
Exactly.
Right.
It also means strengthening governance structures
Right?
to promote transparency and accountability.
Mm.
And of course, it requires investment both
Yeah.
from within Africa and
Mhm.
from responsible partners who are
Yeah.
genuinely committed
Yeah.
to supporting sustainable development.
He mentions the need for new financial mechanisms
Yeah.
that move away from traditional aid structures.
Right.
What are some of the alternative models being explored?
Well, there's growing interest in impact investing, where private capital is directed
Mhm.
towards projects that generate both social and financial returns.
Okay.
We're also seeing the rise of crowdfunding platforms
Mhm.
that connect African entrepreneurs
Right.
directly with investors globally.
So kind of cutting out the middleman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, regional cooperation,
Correct.
where African countries pool their resources
Mhm.
and leverage their collective strength,
Yeah.
offers exciting possibilities.
It feels like a potential turning point.
Yeah.
A shift away from those traditional aid models.
Mm-hmm.
But how do everyday citizens fit into this conversation?
That's a good question.
What role can individuals play
Yeah.
in promoting self-reliance
Mm-hmm.
and sustainable development in Africa?
Well, development isn't just about
Right.
governments and institutions. It's
Yeah.
about people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, individuals can make a difference
Okay.
by supporting African businesses,
Right.
investing in social enterprises,
Okay.
and advocating for responsible policies.
So being engaged citizens,
Exactly.
both locally and globally.
Yeah.
Now I want to go back to Dr. Kokumu's central argument.
Okay.
He suggests that U.S. aid often prioritizes American interests
Mm-hmm.
over genuinely helping Africa.
Yeah.
Do you think he oversimplifies the situation?
It's important to avoid sweeping generalizations.
Yeah.
You know, there are many dedicated individuals within USAID who are committed to African development.
Yeah.
And there have been successes.
Yeah.
But it's also crucial to acknowledge
Right.
that geopolitical considerations
Yeah.
and economic interests
Mhm.
have historically influenced U.S. aid policy.
It seems like we need to move beyond
Yes.
those simplistic narratives
Yeah.
and acknowledge the complexity
I
of
think
this
so.
issue.
Yeah.
But if we accept that U.S. aid
Right.
hasn't always achieved its goals,
Yeah.
what lessons can we learn? How do we move toward a more effective and equitable approach
Right.
to development assistance?
That's a question.
Yeah.
The entire development community
Right.
needs to grapple with
Yeah.
a critical lesson, I think,
Mm-hmm.
is the importance of centering
Okay.
African voices and priorities in
Yeah.
these development initiatives.
Right.
It's about moving away from
Yeah.
this top-down approach
Okay.
and embracing
Yeah.
genuine partnerships
Mm-hmm.
built on mutual respect,
Okay.
shared goals,
Right.
and a commitment to sustainability.
Mutual respect,
Yeah.
shared goals,
Yeah.
and sustainability.
Yeah,
Sounds like a solid foundation
it does.
for any partnership.
Yeah.
Dr. Okuma's article really challenges us
Mm-hmm.
to envision a future for Africa
Right.
that isn't defined by dependency.
Exactly.
It's about fostering
Yeah.
a sense of ownership and agency.
Right.
It's about believing in the potential of Africa
Yes.
to solve its own problems
Yeah.
and chart its own course.
It's a message that resonates with many people, both within Africa and around the world.
It's a message of hope and empowerment.
Absolutely.
I think Dr. Okuma's perspective provides a really valuable framework
Yeah.
for rethinking our approach
Right.
to development assistance.
Yeah.
But I'm also left wondering, what does that future
Yeah.
where Africa is truly self-reliant and thriving actually look like? It really does. It sparks the imagination. What does that future where Africa is truly self-reliant and thriving look like?
Well, I think you have to imagine a continent where African nations are setting their own agendas, leveraging their vast resources and incredible talent to achieve their own development goals.
Okay.
It's about harnessing the power of innovation, entrepreneurship, and regional collaboration to create sustainable and inclusive growth.
It is a very powerful vision. But what are the concrete steps to turn this vision into a reality?
Okay, well, it all starts with good governance.
Okay.
African leaders need to really prioritize transparency, accountability, and the rule of law.
Right.
This creates a stable and predictable environment that attracts investment and fosters economic growth.
Creating the right conditions for success.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, but what about specific areas to focus on?
Well, education is paramount.
Okay.
Investing in human capital, nurturing a skilled and educated workforce is essential for driving innovation and propelling economic development.
Right.
It's also crucial to invest in infrastructure, things like roads and bridges, reliable power grids, expanded internet access. These are the building blocks of a modern, thriving economy.
Those are very foundational elements, right?
Yeah.
But we can't ignore the role of the international community.
Right.
How do we shift from a model of aid to a model of genuine partnership?
Well, it requires, I think, a fundamental shift in the power dynamics. Instead of dictating terms, partners should be listening to African voices, understanding their needs, and supporting their priorities.
Okay.
It's about investing in locally led initiatives, empowering African institutions.
So moving away from that traditional donor-recipient relationship towards a more equitable partnership.
Precisely.
Yeah, okay.
It's about recognizing that Africa has a wealth of knowledge and innovation and cultural richness to offer the world.
Right.
And it's about creating partnerships that benefit everyone involved.
This has been such a thought-provoking conversation. Yeah. Dr. Okunu's article really pushes us to challenge our assumptions about aid and development.
Right.
It's not about handouts.
No.
It's about empowerment.
It is.
It's about investing in the potential of Africa.
Yeah.
And believing in the ability of African nations to shape their own destinies.
Absolutely.
It's really inspiring.
It is.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
Yeah.
And I think Dr. Okumu would agree.
I think so.
That this is just the beginning
of
a much larger conversation.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up here, I want to leave our listeners with a question.
Okay.
Inspired by Dr. Okumu's call to action.
Okay.
What would it look like for Africa to fully embrace its own ingenuity, resilience, and strategic partnerships to create a future that benefits all Africans?
That's the question.
Take some time to reflect on that.
Yeah.
Do some research. Continue this vital conversation.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
And until next time,
keep
learning and get it explained.